Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of A.IdlePodcast, the podcast where I do weekly book reviews. This week, I read Death in the Clouds, previously Death in the Air, by Agatha Christie. So this was released in 1935, and it's about Moneylender Madame Giselle, who has been murdered en route via airplane. We don't really know if it was poison, if it was a wasp, if it was a heart attack, but we do know that there's foul play. Because we know for a fact that Prometheus airliner is in transit. We know for a fact that Madame Giselle's dead. We also know for a fact that she died in the air because she was alive when she got on the plane, obviously. What we don't know is if it was a murder or not. So that's like the only speculation we have here. But luckily we have Detective Hercule, who is always around these things for some reason, I don't know, but he's going to help us put it together. So early on, actually immediately, we get this very descriptive and scene-setting language. The earlier character perspective, or I should say a more prolonged character perspective, is through the character Jane, who is trying to ignore another fellow passenger. And so what happens is, by doing that, she's observing the other things that are going on, and she's just kind of, listening to different conversations, looking at what people are wearing, what people are doing in that moment. This gives the audience a chance to gather as much information as we can, because, this is an Agatha Christie book, so we know some wild stuff is about to go down. The flip side to this descriptive language, however, is that characters are declaring themselves in the beginning, whether verbal or nonverbal. So that could just mean like they're dressing a certain way. If they have a certain jacket on, it means they're a doctor or they have money. But really, what we should all know by now when it comes to reading murder mysteries is that you should question all volunteered information, because it could be used against you, or it could be like trying to purposely mislead you in the direction of another suspect or another sketchy person. This is why Detective Hercule declines speculations and any definitive conclusions until the very end, until he has verified all of his sources. One of his quotes is actually, if one does guess, one should guess with assurance. So he's someone who, he's not betting on anything until he has all of the facts and also all of his questions answered. So that could be like, why would this person want to harm this person? Or does this person know this person? Are they connected in any way? Whatever may have you. Now, along with that descriptive language, we get a lot of dialogue, but also internal monologues. So we're learning a lot about characters through their revealed harbored feelings or their true emotions on situations by getting their inner monologues, which, like other Agatha Christie novels, at the beginning may seem like just errant thoughts that don't really have anything to do with the situation, but somehow those feelings tie in the end. And most of the chapters are titled by the setting or the proximity to the event or character or scene change. So it's very easy to follow along with what's happening and where we are in the situation. And that's helpful because this is a murder mystery. We don't know what's going on most of the time. So it's nice to know where in the story literally we are. So we have a couple of themes here. The first being this psychological moment. So there's conversation, and this keeps being brought up about a possible psychological moment. What does that mean? Basically, it's just a moment where something happens that directs the attention of everyone else away from a present situation. So it could be like turbulence, for example, or a wasp, as we see, and it's on the cover of the book, that gets everyone else's attention, but then it's that means that you're not noticing something else that's going on. So everyone's concerned, well, not everyone, but certain detectives and police officers that Detective Hercule is working with, they're concerned that there was a psychological moment that was purposely meant to distract the other passengers. The problem with that being, like, for example, with turbulence, how do you produce that at the exact moment that you need it, you know? And that's one of the major questions when it comes to if this wasp could have possibly stung Madame Giselle and killed her. Like, how is that possible? So, really, when we're talking about this psychological moment, we're really talking about a red herring. And that's information that is intended to be misleading. It's something that's supposed to take your mind off of the right path and onto someone else. And Christie is like amazing at this because what happens is I think I've gotten it down pat so far with her writing. She builds a completely new world for us in Act 1. You know, she builds up these characters, she tells us what they're supposed to be, and then she hits us with, you know, this gut punch of someone's dead. But by Act 3, that world is completely destroyed. Meaning, we find out that half of those characters are not who they say they are, or or we thought they were really good people, but they're also really, really sketchy, you know, or they have different connections. And so she's really good at kind of directing your attention where she wants it. But by the end of the book, you realize it was all like misguided. But also, I will say though that red herrings can be characters, but also characteristics. So there could be someone that's placed in the book that doesn't really, you know, in the beginning we hear about them being a possible suspect. By the end, we find out that they're really just an innocent bystander. Or we're talking characteristics. So different motives could possibly be red herrings or appearances, like I was talking about earlier, or even just their personality. You know, not everyone is what they seem. So even if someone may seem sketchy, they may be a little bit sketchy, but they might not be like a murderer sketchy. So, and last theme here is justice. So it's interesting with Agatha Christie novels, and especially with the Detective Hercule bunch. Justice is a little bit different. So it's not really about taking down the culprit, it's really about solving the crime. And I say that because what we usually find out is that the victim's demise is proven to be warranted. Like, usually we find out that the victim that was killed in the beginning was a pretty terrible person. So it's like, you know, like that was kind of justice, so we're gonna kind of let everyone else off the hook. So I just think it's interesting that Detective Hercule, although he's trying to find out who committed this crime, I think his focus is more on who did it and why, and not necessarily that, oh, we need to provide justice for this heinous crime. You know, he's a private investigator. He's someone who's looking to put the pieces in the puzzle the correct way. And he's not caught up on making someone pay for this crime, which proves to be kind of a good thing because he's not eager to pin it on just anybody who looks like they can fit the bill. So he's usually right in the end, but his process to getting that so-called justice is very prolonged. Whereas other officers or detectives are like, let's just get the guy that looks like they could do it or has the best motive and be done. And I will say that usually the suspects or the real culprit is counting on that type of thought process. And that's why they throw in those red herrings to kind of put you on a different path towards the quote unquote most likely suspect. Okay, and then I want to reiterate character groups. So when I think it was Death on the Nile, I talked about these character groups, and I'm not going to tell you who goes where, but I'm just going to say, generally speaking, there are 3 character groups in these books. The first is the good guys, and that's usually Detective Hercule and any police officers or whatever that he's working with. And then also I found that like the servants and the quote unquote help, usually like the lower class, not usually, sometimes they're you know, the good guys, because usually they're just kind of here because they have no reason but to be here. Now the suspects, that's the second group. These are the people that all have the motives to kill, which at first glance in the book, it usually seems like there's like 10 suspects. However, there's a difference. It's usually a much smaller number, But the third group of characters, the shady bunch, is everyone. So I've learned from Agatha Christie that and I think what makes her books the best is that everyone has a secret. And the task is finding out if that secret is somehow implicated in a murder. But usually she has a cast of characters that are sketchy, weird, out of the norm, and just shady. And so, you're trying to figure out, okay, are they acting like that because they're trying to get away with murder, or are they just weird? Which is great because honestly, like in real life, aren't we all like weird? So everyone has a secret. So that's just my kind of three categories of characters. And I've given up trying to figure out at the beginning of the book who did what. I'm usually not right. So, but yeah, that's just kind of like a guideline to go by when you're reading anything Christie writes. Okay, and before I get to the review, this is like a new thing, and I think that I decided to do this because I'm currently reading the 48 Laws of Power. So I wanted to talk about how the 48 laws are in practice in this book. Not all 48. I think I only have like 5 listed here. Yeah, but okay, so for example, law number 6, which is court attention at all cost. This is that whole idea that usually somebody involved in the crime is courting attention because they're trying to create that psychological moment. So maybe they're drawing that attention to themselves, or they're like creating some sort of disruption or whatever, but it's to throw someone else off. Or they're letting another character court all the tension because they know that like they're going to get away scotch-free or whatever. So that's another law in practice. Number 5, which is so much depends on reputation, guard it with your life. Here's the thing. Guilty people are usually trying to guard their reputation. And here in particular, we see it very well because Madame Giselle, she was a moneylender. She was someone who was giving out money to people and she expected it to be paid back with interest. And the way that she did business was that she basically would blackmail them into giving her money back. So everyone that she was dealing with had a reputation to protect. And arguably, they were willing to kill to protect that reputation. Law number 19, know who you're dealing with. Do not offend the wrong person. Detective Hercule uses this to gather information. And this goes back to the idea that he's not eager to pin anything on anyone because of status, because of proximity to the person. And so in this book, we see him get information out of like a servant that the other police officer wasn't able to get, because they kind of like were talking to this person like, I know you're guilty, I know you're involved, what happened. Whereas Detective Hercule he's good at reading people and being even killed enough to get the information that he needs. And he got a lot of information that the police officers were unable to get. Law number 24, play the perfect courtier. This kind of goes along with that as well. Detective Hercule used this to gather information as well. He was, how should I say? I don't want to spoil this for you, so I'll just say this. Along with not being eager to condemn anyone, he also was not eager to push people away. So he was very good at maintaining connections that it seemed like he needed those connections for other things, but in the end, he was really gathering all the information that he needed to then, come to the correct, appropriate conclusion. And lastly, again, I feel like I'm like repeating myself, but law number 20, do not commit to anyone. Detective Hercule never solidifies on an intention, a motive, or a suspect until like the literal last chapter. So he's good at thinking and analyzing and strategizing before he talks. We could all learn something from him. Okay, so honestly, I mean, I love Agatha Christie and I love murder mysteries, and that's been like my go to fiction for like the past year or so. This was slightly different from Murder on the Orient Express and Death on the Nile. I will say though that the suspect that was revealed at the end, I had never guessed it, but this is like the first time that the suspect truly seems evil to me. Like, usually I'm on the fence about the suspects and the victims or whatnot. I'm like, okay, well, they were like bad people, but they also did some good. So it's like the line of justice is blurred, but I was very happy to see this particular suspect or suspects um, be revealed. But there's something about this book that just, it wasn't that it was underwhelming. I think it was just different than what I'm used to reading from her. And also, this is only the third book that I've read by Agatha Christie, so maybe I just need to read a little bit more. I have like a couple more on my shelf. Um, but yeah, I mean, it was good. Honestly, like I always say with Christie, this is an immediate reread because you find out all of the pieces to the puzzle at the end. When you reread it a second time, you're able to put things into perspective, and then you can kind of see things through Detective Hercule's eyes, because now you're seeing the connections that you weren't able to process before. So yeah, this is a reread. I'm keeping this book, but I didn't like that the suspect was so like black and white, clearly evil. Clearly, there were no redeeming qualities. So I don't know. But yeah, so a couple takeaways here. Never trust a smile, especially if it's charming. And also just pay attention. Pay attention to everything, everyone. Everyone's intentions are not what they seem. And then maybe read the 48 Laws of Power. It's really good, and it can help you kind of break down the characters in her books, but also just in life. So yeah, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode. I will see you all next week. Thank you. Bye.